strap on your seatbelts and get ready for what I hope is going to be a pretty transformational lesson here to help you understand exactly how de-escalation works and how you might be able to avoid the next argument that you get in. I want you to just picture this for a minute. Let's say that it's a weeknight. Maybe you've had a long day and you walk through the front door of your house and potentially maybe your partner is sitting at the kitchen table with a kind of bank statement pulled up. Or even maybe it's your brother who just kind of said something diabolical at the dinner table about something with politics, and you can kind of see your dad's jaw tightening up as he prepares to say something and kind of get into that argumentative state. And what do most of us do? What do most human beings do in this situation? We react. We match whatever energy just got thrown at us, and we almost tend to get louder or shut down completely. Oftentimes, I think a lot of us kind of say that thing that we've been holding on to for weeks because it now finally feels justified. We've all been in some similar situation to this before. But here's the thing that nobody talks about. There are people out there who do this for a living. So they do de-escalation for a living. Not the arguing part, the undoing it part. So we see crisis teams and people who walk into situations professionally that have already exploded, and they're able to somehow talk everybody in the room back down to earth. And they definitely don't do it by being louder or tougher than anyone else, or because they are so much more intelligent or they're more right. The way they do it is by understanding a system and a sequence of how psychology works, how the human brain works, and how to hack in to our propensity for competition. What I'm going to deliver to you is a complete system built of 4 steps. Once you actually understand the underlying processes of what's happening inside of another person's brain during a fight or an argument, I promise you are never going to look at another argument the same way ever again. So before I walk you through the technique, one thing that you need to understand is what's actually happening here. Under the hood, when someone gets angry, this doesn't have to be your partner specifically, anyone. This could be your dad, your coworker, maybe the guy at the airport who found out his flight is canceled and is kind of freaking out at the poor person at the desk. This is a universal concept of frustration and escalation inside of the human brain. When a human being starts to get genuinely angry or scared, really what we're seeing is activity in the prefrontal cortex starts to decrease, which is the region that's responsible for logic, reasoning, impulse control, long-term thinking, basically everything that you need to have a productive conversation. And at the same time, activation in the limbic region increases. So that's the part of the brain that processes threats and fear and survival and is the primary processing center of emotions. So what you're looking at in real time is a person whose ability to kind of think rationally is just physically diminishing as their brain enters this basically psychological state of survival. Even if their life isn't remotely in danger, their body doesn't know the difference. So a credit card statement can essentially trigger the exact same survival wiring as a genuine threat, because that's how the brain was developed in order for us to be able to survive. Ancient humans didn't have credit card statements to worry about. We had cougars and lions and I guess grizzly bears maybe to some small degree to worry about. So this is the mistake that everyone makes. When someone's in that state, we try to trigger them out of it by saying things like, just calm down, or you're overreacting, or hey, let me explain what's happening here. And the problem with every one of those phrases, every single one is aimed at rational logic and the prefrontal cortex. And that part of the brain, as we just talked about, just went quiet. It is currently not running the show. You're basically standing in an empty room giving a presentation to somebody who's not there. Really, I think you only have one job. Essentially, you want to move that person out of survival mode and back into the part of their brain that actually understands the English language and can hear you and will be able to process what you're saying and respond like a rational human being. These are the exact 4 moves that you can follow to do that. And this system I'm going to teach you today is based off of the exact systems that behavioral negotiators, people in all different kinds of crisis teams all over the world use. So here's the setup. Let's imagine it's a weeknight. Let's say you walk in the door, your partner's hanging out at the kitchen table with the laptop open, bank account sitting there on the screen, the credit card statement is right next to it. And before you even set your keys down, you hear, "Oh my God, $400? You spent $400 and you didn't even think to mention it to me?" Okay, now I want you to pause right here. This is the exact moment, the fork in the road, where about 95% of people are going to take the wrong path because your brain, your limbic system, is already loading a response. It was for work, or hey, you spend money too. Or maybe you're going to say, "Why are you going through my stuff?" Every one of these feels completely justified in the moment to most of us. And every one of them is essentially a lit match in a room full of gasoline. The person in front of you, I want you to understand, is running a script in their head. They already know exactly how this argument is potentially going to play out in their mind. They have a line that they've been working on and planning to say, and then they think that you're going to say yours, it's going to escalate, and likely someone's going to storm off angry or something similar. And your first job is to go in and break that script, to inject something unexpected, something that generates real novelty, so that their brain has to actually pause and recalculate, what does this situation mean and what's actually happening here? You want to do it in a way that's completely non-confrontational. Sometimes that can be as simple as using their name and acknowledging them. It could really just look like, "Hey, Sarah, I completely hear you." That alone can shift the entire dynamic because it's not what they were expecting. They were expecting probably defense. And instead, they got seen. And that moment of surprise, that brief, "Wait a second, this is not how this usually goes," that happens in that person's mind, is your brief opening. So when something unexpected happens, essentially their brain's reticular activating system is going to kick in and force a shift in their attention. So I want you to understand, this is not the whole fix. This is what creates a brief behavioral window, which allows us to insert our next steps that we're going to go through and have them actually begin to work. And if you really want to break the script in a situation like this, depending on the context and who you're talking to, you can go even further with maybe something that sounds like this. So imagine we said, "Wow, $400? I can imagine that threw you for a loop when you saw that. Hey, did you notice that the neighbors finally mowed their lawn?" Now, listening to me say that, you might have been thinking, that kind of sounds absurd. But in practice, what's happening is the novelty of it pulls the brain out of the emotional spiral, because it can simply not process the pattern that it was expecting to happen. And you've introduced something that the prefrontal cortex has to re-engage with just to make sense of what's actually happening here. And now you've got your window. Even if just for a brief second, you've created this behavioral window that we can now jump through. This is where we get to step 2, which is validate. And this is where we step through that brief behavioral window that we just created. And essentially you do it by doing the one thing that nobody expects in a fight, which is you agree with them. we might say something like, I think you're kind of right to be upset. I mean, honestly, if I looked at a bank statement and I saw a charge that I didn't know about, I'd be pretty pissed off too. This is really important because you're not admitting fault. What you're doing is that you're conceding the argument. And that distinction is really what changes everything. So we start to see the threat level drops, maybe not all the way, but enough for it to keep going. And this is when we can start to stack undeniable truths right on top of that. So these are just simple statements that are so obviously true that the brain has no choice but to agree with them. This could sound as simple as something like, hey, it's Tuesday night. I know we're both probably tired. And I think that at the end of the day, we're having this conversation because we both care about where the money goes. And every single time their brain silently agrees with one of these facts, you're building what's called a chain of unconscious agreement. You're not simply arguing anymore. You're actually syncing with their nervous system and with their mind. And every one of these micro agreements, you're essentially pulling their processing 1 inch closer back to the prefrontal cortex, back to where the conversation can actually happen. And in the process, essentially you're increasing their suggestibility, which is exactly where you need them to be for these next 2 steps to really work. This brings us to step 3, which is observe. I don't mean some corny BS observation. I mean a real one. Something that this person needs to feel about themselves. So this might be their competence, their significance, or their intelligence. This could sound as simple as, you catch things that I think I honestly would completely miss. And in many ways, you keep closer track of this stuff than most people do. That's very likely one of the main reasons that our finances aren't in a complete state of disaster. You're essentially at this stage literally manufacturing calm inside of another person's body. This is not through some type of a manipulation. This is through genuine, real recognition, through actually seeing the person in front of you. And here's the part that you can't skip. It has to be real. If you drop some kind of a hollow compliment in the middle of a heated discussion where the person has a very activated sympathetic nervous system, the other person's brain is on high alert for this kind of thing, and they're going to flag it instantly. And I promise you will lose everything that you just built. This only works if you actually mean it, which means that you actually have to pause, look at this real human, and find the thing that's genuinely true about them. And this is what brings us to step 4. When we get that right, this opens the door for this final action that is going to completely diffuse everything. But most people get this step completely wrong. And the reason is that their instinct is to close the argument. They maybe just say something like, okay, so I guess we can just move on, right? Or, so should we go watch our TV show? Or, okay, so how long till dinner's ready? Or whatever the case may be. The moment that someone feels their freedom to choose freely is being threatened, they're going to resist. And they will resist even if the option that you're suggesting is exactly in line with what they even want. So we don't close in the final step. What we do is we actually open. And this is the key distinction I want you to really hear. You shift from a competitive frame to installing a collaborative frame that is so enticing that it makes it incredibly difficult to not accept. And I want to give you a real example of it. A competitive frame often sounds like, here's what we need to do going forward. So what's happening there underneath the surface? You're dictating the term. Even if the terms are reasonable, the other person's brain hears an opponent hidden in that. They hear a winner and they hear a loser. This is what a collaborative frame sounds like. What I'd love is for us to figure this out together in a way that I don't want you to have to feel like you're compromising on any of the things that actually matter to you. So when you frame it that way, essentially you invite someone to come on the same team as you instead of positioning yourself across from them. And I hear many people in many situations fall or trip into this competitive frame without even realizing that they're doing it. In their mind, they think they're trying to work with the other person. And then they get these strong and negative emotional reactions back, and they don't understand the reason is because they've unconsciously triggered this bid for competition. So you're not asking them to agree with you here, you're asking them to collaborate. And you might be thinking here, well, if I say that, then how is the person supposed to be directed towards a collaborative outcome? Well, we've already set up all of the steps for that in the previous steps. So if we're doing those correctly, the objective of good influence is not to force somebody into a particular outcome or decision. The objective of good influence is to create a hallway or path whereby our preferred decision or behavioral choice becomes the natural, logical, and emotionally obvious solution for the person in front of us. At the end of this is when you can add one more piece, which is taking ownership of the situation, and this is important, before you're even asked. So we can say something along the lines of, you know, I should have told you about the charge before you found it, and that is on me. We need to be very careful about the way that we accept responsibility in a situation, but this is an important part of a real apology, and being willing to put things on our shoulders and being willing to fully be accountable for things because of everything that we're doing and we've done before is now not going to escalate the situation. It's going to allow the person to begin to feel real emotional closure about what's happening. So here's what I need you to walk away with. This is not some kind of a parlor trick. This is not some kind of a random script for you to memorize and perform like, I don't know, a hostage negotiation AI. This is a way of understanding what's physically happening inside of another person. When their emotions really take over and meeting them instead of fighting them across the room. Please do not wait for the next blow up to try this. What I want you to do is to practice it when things are calm. So use the validation step in just a random conversation this week. Start noticing which sensory words people use that are the closest to you, and build that muscle now while the stakes are actually still low. Because I promise you, the next argument is coming. This is not because you're a broken person or you have a broken relationship. It's because you're a human. And being a human means you're going to collide with people you care about. That's just the deal you make with life. The only question is whether you're going to collide in a way that you always have before, or whether you're going to try something different. Thanks for hanging out with me. I'll see you on the next one. Let me know if this was helpful for you, and I will look forward to seeing you on the flip side. Take care, everyone.